the war could have been over by now if the aid came more quickly and in larger quantities.
Basically, what happened? Our counteroffensive last summer has been extremely successful and extremely fast. We took back Kharkiv area and Kherson very quickly without Russians knowing exactly our plans. But we didn't have enough weapons to continue and take over the whole, liberate the whole territory back. And all we needed is get into Melitopol and
cut off the land bridge to Crimea.
Cut off the land bridge. We did not get enough weapons then. And this has been discussed also in various NATO summits. I was in Davos in January. The NATO panel and Duda himself mentioned that if Ukraine got enough weapons back then, the war would have been over. The question stands why we didn't get these weapons. What is happening today now is Russian Nazis managed to fortify and mine all the territories, the hundreds of kilometers of this border. So anytime we are trying to do this counteroffensive now, our people are dying on mines. So what we are having now, instead of liberating territory last summer, we are now going to have thousands or hundreds of thousands of disabled Ukrainian people who are trying to demine this territory without enough demining equipment, without enough tanks, without fighter jets. So as a citizen of the world, to be honest, I'm quite appalled at what is happening, and I don't know the reason why it has been happening so slow and so inconsecutively.
Yes, it seems like there are a lot of limits that are being put on the Ukrainians, not just with the weapons, but also what they can do with the weapons. For example, with Western weapons, it's not allowed to strike Russian weapons depots within Russia, for example.
It's ridiculous. They're storing their weapons of destruction, from which they're storing their missiles, from which they're slaughtering our people in their sleep. And we cannot bomb these depots, we cannot bomb these territories, we cannot assassinate their war criminals. This is a joke.
Also, there is still a lot of equipment that has been promised but has not arrived yet. For example, the American Abrams tanks are supposed to arrive in a couple of months. But by then, the summer offensive will, at least that window, will have closed. F-16 fighter jets training is supposed to start, but it technically could have started already or in the coming days. Instead, they are setting up a center in Romania that will take, again, probably a couple of months before they start.
I think they're saying we should have F-16 with the pilots by the end of this year or so.
What do you think? Where do these limitations come from? Why are people in the West so timid when it comes to this war?
If we are talking specifically about the most obvious reasons, the invention of nuclear weapons has been an absolute failure, because now we are having these miserable Nazistic states, dictatorial societies that are able to dictate the rest of the world what they want to do. Just because they have those weapons of mass destruction. So this is obviously the simplest explanation, which I don't think is even valid or very relevant, but this is the explanation that is being exploited by the West as the reason for not giving us enough.
It seems like, apart from the fear in the West that Russia could use nuclear weapons, there seems to also be a fear that if Russia loses the war badly, then there will be internal instability.
Correct.
During Prigozhin's recent march of Moscow, there were even reports of Western military representatives telling the Ukrainians that do not take advantage of this situation, do not attack right now, because then maybe Russia, there could be instability, there could be a collapse, the nuclear weapons could end up in the hands of several different regions that would be fighting against.
God forbid.
Yes. So it does seem that this fear of nuclear weapons, one way or another, is limiting Western support. But if we don't look at the West, you mentioned earlier that you have Polish citizenship, you have Polish family. Where does this Polish history come from? You mentioned that part of your Polish family was persecuted or even murdered during the communist years. Would you develop that a little bit?
Yes, my grandmother was a very proud Polish woman, Kazimira Szubinska. She was coming from a Polish aristocracy, and her father was the owner, the large landowner, and he had his factories. So obviously, Soviets didn't like. First, they hated Poles. They were killing and continuing ethnic cleansing against Polish people. And secondly, they didn't like anyone with brains or money. So first they tortured him, and then they shot him in the back of the head from behind. And then they did the same to her brothers, two of her brothers. So she was left alone as an orphan, taking care of her sister. And her mother died from tuberculosis. So she had a very difficult upbringing, and she had to find work. She was very hardworking. She helped to raise her sister, and then she met my Ukrainian grandfather. And interesting in all this situation is that throughout all these horrors that Soviets has inflicted upon our family, she has never given up her Polish nationality, because in Soviet times there was this like passport or the book where you had to have your nationality written down, almost like like Jews had to write that they were Jews during Nazi Germany. So it wasn't that different. She would never give up saying being Polish, even though she could have killed as well. Yeah, so she always tried, she died when I was 12. She always tried to teach me Polish. Back then I was like, why do I need these languages? I don't care. So yeah, I grew up in kind of Ukrainian speaking, a bit of Polish speaking family in central Ukraine.
It might be worth mentioning here because most of the people have never heard about this, but the so-called NKVD Polish operation, in which more than 100,000 Poles were killed in 1937, 1938, is one of those genocides that really has received the least attention by the world, by historians, by politicians. So for those who are interested in various examples of persecutions of various nations, then that is something that they can look up. It also shows the tragedy that the Poles living in the Soviet Union experienced, not just after the war, but also before the Second World War. For example, in the Holodomor, this is something that even in Poland people don't talk about a lot, but among the 7 million victims or so, there were also around 50,000 Poles that starved to death. So a lot of the tragedies that affected the Ukrainians in the Soviet Union were also affecting the Poles. But if we look at the relationship today between Ukrainians and Poles, how would you describe it? Has it changed a lot by the war?
Maybe because of my background, I always considered Poles and Ukrainians to be brothers, almost as the same nation. I see very few differences. Unfortunately for Ukraine, unfortunately for us, we have been under this Soviet and Russian influence more, and we didn't have the opportunity to develop as much as Poland. And I also do appreciate the sacrifices Poland has made throughout 90s with the shock therapy. And now Poland is one of the fastest growing economy in Europe, and I'm pretty sure it will overtake Germany as the European leader. So this is one thing. Another thing, the response of Polish people, to be fair, it was kind of maybe expected, knowing how amazing Polish people are, personally knowing so many Polish people, but it was also overwhelming. Such a warm response and so much help, completely altruistic, completely not expecting anything in return. I just was talking to some of my friends here who are Ukrainians, and they say, this Polish people, they're such noble people. Just imagine over 1 million refugees with a bit of a different mentality, different language coming here. It's hard, and they're so welcoming, and they're so helpful, always trying to help. So Polish people have shown themselves in the best possible way. So to me personally, when I hear, of course, there is this, we all had horrible history being next to Russia and Nazi Germany. And we did have very dark history between our brotherly nations as well. And I take it very personally as a Polish and a Ukrainian, knowing that there was a time when we were slaughtering each other. And of course, there has to be a serious reconciliation regarding Volyn massacre, regarding what Ukrainians have been doing to Poles. There was some part, the reverse. And it looks like our politicians are working very closely to overcome this. And I think people should talk openly about this, but we also shouldn't create tension between us who are living now and who are just trying to look into the future. Because what I see what's happening from national identity point of view is Russians are continuously digging in the past. When I'm reading their Telegram channels or sometimes just for fun watching their television maybe a few years ago, everyone everywhere is an enemy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Everyone a historical enemy. And Polish and Ukrainians, we don't need that. We need to be looking into our future, into our bright joint future. We need to work through the issues, but we need to know that we are in this together.